This is In Pursuit, Research Perspectives from Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago. I am your host, Dr. Patrick Seed, President and Chief Research Officer of Stanley Manny Children's Research Institute, one of the nation's largest freestanding pediatric research centers. Our guest today is a surgeon, engineer, scientist who will take us inside the operating room of a major children's hospital and illustrate how identifying and solving surgical problems through research and innovation can have an exponential impact on the care and outcomes of our patients. And of course, we'll learn how he got to this point in his professional journey. Dr. Seth Goldstien is a pediatric general and thoracic surgeon at Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital, Chicago. He is also an assistant professor of surgery at Northwestern University's Feinberg School of Medicine and the associate program director for the Pediatric Surgery Fellowship at Northwestern's McGaw Medical Center. Seth, welcome to In Pursuit podcast. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here.
So I introduced you as a surgeon, engineer, and scientist. Do you want to set the stage a little for our listeners by describing where you currently focus your work in both your surgical and your research roles?
I'd love to. You said the word innovator in there. That always makes me proud. That doesn't necessarily tag along with surgeon, scientist, academic surgeon in all instances, it turns out. The art and science of surgery is high stakes, and so there is a tendency to play it safe and go with what you know. And this idea that trying new things comes with uncertainty, but if we don't think of the consequences, and especially with regards to children whose technological care over the past 30, 40 years has lagged a decade behind adults just because of this lack of innovative spirit on top of some of the obvious technical challenges of helping the kids.
What kind of surgery do you do? Just what are the big categories? And similarly, let's flip over and just talk about the different areas of research that you tend to, excuse the pun, operate in.
The pediatric general surgeon is arranged to fulfill most surgical needs of a children's hospital. So rather than a tendency to specialize in a certain disease or organ system, as we often see in other contemporary surgeons, we have very broad-based practice. So, for example, that ranges everywhere from congenital anomalies. Children are born with extra and without necessary body parts from time to time. Those used to be lethal conditions and now are correctable. We have intensive care and then neonatal intensive care units. We have childhood cancers that are devastating to all involved. Trauma, the leading cause of death in American children is trauma, not any of the other rare diseases that get much more press. And so we pride ourselves in needing to be creative for that reason, because we're over such a broad range of ages, sizes, and diseases.
What about research? Where do you spend most of your time? What are the big areas that you tend to focus on?
That moniker, surgeon scientist, never made as much sense to me because surgeon is the adjective. And I think my identity is more of surgeon. So I'm looking for adjectives to describe. So maybe academic surgeon or innovative surgeon would probably suit me better. My focus has always principally been on ideas and technologies that I can either implement right away or see a future in implementation to using in our operating rooms.
Tell us a little bit about what makes the pediatric surgical space more challenging or unique from other surgical specialties, when we think about big people, adults.
Some of them, as I alluded to when I said technical considerations, I just mean the size of the patients. That doesn't come as a surprise to some, but there are others. If you think about what I've told you about our field, it's often comprising infrequent presentations of diseases. So research regarding adult heart disease, a good trial might enroll 10,000 subjects. You would be lucky to pick a disease in the field of pediatric surgery that you could find a couple hundred over the course of many centers and many years. So some of it's the infrequency. There are very specific to pediatric surgery considerations with regards to innovation and research. Children are a vulnerable population. it is really interesting to get a history lesson in some of the advances in society and medicine and hear of children at the receiving end. Jenner's first cowpox, smallpox is just injected into the next child that came his way. And so it just as a reminder of the vulnerability of children. So you can imagine to try something new means having a very strong sense of the fiduciary relationship you have with that child's parents who are also concerned and maybe the most important stakeholders, and balancing that with this idea of generating new knowledge and technology for posterity.
Yeah, certainly the vulnerability of children adds a big layer to some of our goals to improve healthcare for kids. I imagine there's a lot of barriers or challenges in just the devices and the technology, right? Because of size, developmental stage of kids. Can you give any example? It would be great for people to sort of be with you in the operating room and to have a little bit of a vantage point to conduct surgery on, an infant or a toddler when you have devices that may have been designed for a 170-pound man, right?
Yes. Consider that in the operating room, we desire energy devices to prevent bleeding. So cutting through anything with a knife will make it bleed. Whereas if you divide any soft tissue or organ with energy, you can apply hemostasis or bleeding stoppage power even as you're coming through it. So we desire that. And we desire minimally invasive surgery for children. Must we create large scars and prolonged recoveries if we can poke in minimally invasive instruments? The rub is that this is our most common example. The cameras, instruments, and energy devices are made for people that many times are 10 or 20 times as large. So we will approach the manufacturers and we will say, we would like an energy device that fits through a 3 millimeter laparoscopic trocar or port. That's our route of entry. And they will say, how many units might we sell? At which point we have to say, the benefit would be great to an admittedly smaller market than you're used to, but we want to consider it. And oh, by the way, not just the size, but you know full well, Pat, the adage that kids are not just small adults. And so even as we get interested, commercial vendors, industry partners, or researchers, we will throw in a twist. Oh, and we need to do it a little bit differently because children are different. And so these just add in combination to barriers to technology innovation.
Yeah, I can imagine it leads to a lot of challenges, and you already referred to it, a lot of creating solutions out of what you have that may not be optimal, but you have to be sort of clever and innovative on the spot. Tell me a little bit about the areas of surgical innovation that you've focused on. What are some unique pediatric problems that you found particularly daunting and have raised some passion in you to come up with your own solutions for those?
Okay, I'd like to tell you a story about near infrared light.
Excellent.
But I want to go way back and sort of tell you how the research that I was involved in informed my surgical practice. So it all started with a disease that pediatric surgeons take care of called necrotizing enterocolitis. This is a really terrible intestinal ischemia of premature newborns. It comes without warning, and we never know how bad it is because we can't see the bowel. But as a surgeon, it's been my job to open many abdomens and look at that bowel and remove any offending culprits. And so very early in my career, I realized that my eye knows unhealthy bowel when I see it. Why can't I figure out a way to figuratively look at it in the at-risk population and see when the bad things are coming? This was around the time that those doorbells were coming out. You know, the Bluetooth doorbells that everybody has linked to their phone. I thought, oh, perhaps we can implant a Bluetooth camera or, something along those lines. Just thinking, again, broadly and creatively, I came to realize that I didn't need that. The skin of the infants is so thin that I could, air quotes, see through the belly if I just used the right frequency of light. So then I liken it to this idea of us getting cell phone reception in a room with all the doors and the windows closed. We're familiar with this idea that structures can be opaque to visible light and then pass longer frequencies through, no problem. I realized that near infrared detection of the intestinal ischemia in necrotizing enterocolitis was possible. And so this was a real benefit of coming to a place like Lurie Children's with a Northwestern partnership, sort of a made in Chicago story. We've got multiple neonatal intensive care units associated with our hospital and medical school. And so a large enough population that even an unusual disease can be captured, and a culture that supported research and innovation to develop this. So this near-infrared detection of necrotizing enterocolitis started in an animal model, has developed with support into a first-in-human trial in our neonatal intensive care units. And I'll tell you more about that. I'm giving you context to describe the way I feel about wavelengths of light outside the visible as one of my principal stocks in trade. And what was so interesting that I believe serendipitously occurred to me over the course of my clinical career with that hat on is that operative technology to detect infrared light started to become available in the operating room. Now, why is that? That has very little to do with necrotizing enterocolitis and more to do with the fact that something called indocyanine green, which is a fluorescent contrast agent, was becoming more and more widely available. And so here I was armed with a whole knowledge of the powers of infrared light, and I saw very early in development the idea that surgery could be guided by fluorescence in the operating room. Now, here is a marriage of the research I'm already working on and a clinical innovation that I think is ready immediately to help the children in front of me. And so to finally come back around to your question of some of the innovative techniques that I'm most interested in, we have a fluorescence-guided surgery program at Lurie Children's Hospital. And this is a concept that instead of just using my eyes to interpret what's on the screen, which I call white light, that's just what we all see, white light, I can make structures, either structures that I'm interested in removing or structures that I'm interested in leaving out of harm's way. I can make them glow right under my eyes using the technology that's already available to us in the operating room. This is making operations safer, faster, overall better, taking more tumor, leaving more vital structures behind. This idea of fluorescence-guided surgery is something I've put a lot of thought and effort into.
Yeah, it sounds really fascinating. Let's start with the necrotizing enterocolitis story, and then let's move into the operating suite. So you have a baby who is probably really premature, right? Maybe this baby isn't tolerating their feeds as well, or the abdomen's a little bit of increased size. What do you do with this near infrared light technology to detect what might be dying bowel? What are you using as the device?
First, what you have to understand is that without my probe, which I'll describe, all you can do is watch and wait and fret. We don't have great therapies, except that we know that early recognition and a lot of supportive care is usually the sauce that will avoid an operation. So my technology is constructed as a handheld probe, so a wand that one person holds in the hand, and it's a light, gentle, non-invasive touch to the abdomen, just to one side of the navel or the other. And the light comes out and is reflected off underlying structures back into the probe, which runs by the same fiber optic cable to a spectrometer. A spectrometer is a light detector. And so the spectrometer essentially gives you a curve. It is the science to what your eyes might see if you could see in that wavelength. It's a uniquely surgical observation to know that the degree of intestinal ischemia and threatened loss is absolutely proportional to a certain appearance. It starts as sort of a dusky, deoxygenated hemoglobin look, and then it turns into more of a purplish black necrotic look as all the anaerobic cellular pathways go crazy. And so this idea that, okay, if my eye knows what the intestines will look like as they go dark, then the spectrometer can detect that. So it takes about 1 second. It's a non-invasive, gentle light touch to the abdomen, and I get an answer regarding the state of color. And then I have to know that that state of color is a good proxy for health.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. I think, most people are familiar with a fetal ultrasound during pregnancy and things. Why not use ultrasound? Why wouldn't that work, right? That looks through bellies into whether it's a fetus or a liver in somebody or a kidney and other things.
It's true, but there's a piece of information that the ultrasound lacks, and that is the fact that by the time you've seen a change to the shape of something or different amounts of fluid or air in it, that's too late in the disease process. It just so happens that the way ultrasound draws that picture won't find the early signs. And so there are some varieties of ultrasound like photoacoustic imaging that I've thought about because I try to take a broad approach to this. I've come to believe it's probably light-based, the answer to this early diagnosis query.
You referred a number of times in the journey, at least of the near-infrared spectroscopy, to coming up with ideas and needing to see those ideas through in different stages and things. Who do you think of as a mentor or a guide? Who's sort of helped you on this journey at different stages to get to being a scientist and a surgeon and an engineer?
Well, my training was at Johns Hopkins Hospital in Baltimore, and I have to credit a number of my mentors there with helping me develop the skill set to be both clinician and academic surgeon. As I've come to Northwestern, interestingly, you figure this doesn't get said out loud, but the newer the idea, the less likely it is that you'll find folks around you that can guide you exactly. But the Northwestern and Lurie environments have been very supportive. For instance, in my first in-human trial, I've found myself with the data that I've collected, and okay, these are squiggles on a page. That's how they start. But I never wanted this to be reliant on reading the matrix, so to speak, the way we look at EKGs and quibble about different deflections of the curve this way or that way. And so I decided that artificial intelligence, machine learning approach would be the best way to approach these complex data. Well, lo and behold, we have many folks in our academic orbit that are willing mentors and collaborators with regards to the machine learning. And so that's been a remarkable journey to sort of try to start speaking that language and figure out what to do with these data and how could you turn it into something that would be beneficial in real time.
Yeah, the ecosystem is so much, isn't it? Right. It just takes an idea to something that you can realize it in reality. I've been really impressed with biomedical engineering. It's actually become more intelligent over years. And it's sort of a paradox because the reason why I think it's gotten to be more intelligent is actually because we've overcome some of the hubris we've had for a long time. I think engineering went through a stage in my observation where we thought that humans could come up with better solutions than nature already had. And I think we're now getting back to getting inspiration from nature, which to me is very intuitive. There are evolved processes that have undergone thousands, millions of years, right, to get to a solution that's optimized. So how do we take that solution and bring it to the other places where we want to improve health, right, in these what are non-natural circumstances? Are there any examples of inspiration you've got either from nature or from other industries that you've said, boy, if I brought that over to this problem that really plagues me, I would get a jump start crossing those parallel lines, right? From one idea in one area over into something that's relevant to the problems you're seeing in kids who have surgical needs.
Those are such great insights, and it reminds me of an adage that I came to believe as I trained in adults, which was anytime you're in the intensive care unit, you can't outsmart the human kidney. It's almost a natural stages of hubris. You come up with the medications that can augment some of those functions, but the best thing you can do for a healthy kidney is let it work its process. The analogy that I would draw to some of the innovative surgical work is back to fluorescence. So when we have wanted to know where the bile duct is or where the ureters are, for example, surgeons have invested a great deal of time and energy figuring out how to insert sharp objects into different spaces. Whereas that is not ideal if we can use our own body's physiology to accomplish the same task. Our own bodies sequester fluids in those spaces without a lot of effort. So really, The trick is to give, for example, contrast agents that are either cleared exclusively by the liver. Well, they will end up in the extrahepatic biliary tree without any effort. Cleared by the kidney. Well, they will end up in short order in the ureters without any extra effort. And using this command of human physiology to think, okay, let's downgrade the hubris, so to speak, and sort of rely on body functions to get things where they need to be, keep things out of harm's way, etc.
I want to finish with asking you a little bit about the role of teamwork in all of this. I think often we talk about invention and innovation and research about an I or a me, and yet so much of it's because of the team. Can you talk about something you're working on and how the team has made what you're doing more likely to be something impactful and enriching for everybody involved and motivating for all the individuals to contribute?
Absolutely. And that is so easy to do in our academic ecosystem. There's no question that teams make better science. I'll tell you, that's not hard for surgeons to come to terms with because teams make operations better. That is a dance of which we consider ourselves the conductor or captain in many instances, but there are no fewer than 6 people in any complex operation to make it go smoothly. I mean, surgeons and anesthesiologists and nurses and scrub technicians. And so very quickly in our line of work, you realize we don't operate literally or figuratively in a vacuum. And so that same thing is true for the research and innovation as well. Sometimes the best I can do is identify a problem space and some potential attempts at solutions and then turn to the smart folks around me. Well, the smart folks in this instance are teams of graduate biomedical engineering students that come by, identify clinical needs, and then run with those in many instances, making inventions, companies, etc. We've got ideas like that being inculcated that there is no chance I would have had the time, energy, or know-how to run with on my own.
Yeah, graduate students bring a lot to the team in a lot of different ways, both fantastic ideas, a real balance of growing knowledge and expertise that often complements yours, but also a little naivete and often adds a lot, actually, right? Sometimes you get the hard question of, well, why do it that way? And we all step back and scratch our head, right? And say, I don't know. Why do we do it that way?
And I've come to believe that even if the queries seem obvious, if you can't defend the way something is done with logic other than it's just the way we do it, then it deserves a real critical look.
Yeah, we're in agreement on that. Well, listen, Seth, I want to thank you for joining me today on the podcast.
It is absolutely my pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
For more information on Stanley Manny Children's Research Institute at Ann and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital of Chicago, visit our website, research.lurieChildren's.org.